I just tell you, thank you. Can I just tell you, I have never been so excited to be standing behind the stage there, being told that there are 1,500 young patriots here, and when I see the little commercial from Heritage, the conservative mothership, and the photograph of the Gipper comes on, and you all start cheering. Wow, you know your stuff. So my name's Sebastian Gorka. I was former strategist to Donald Trump, and now I have a national radio show called America First. And that was, thank you. And that was me with a guy called Brian Karim, who spent 2.5 years verbally abusing Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And I thought it was time to give him a little bit of patriotic response. I don't have a script. I just want to tell you a story today. But first things first, I was impressed with the questions you asked the previous speaker and the personal stories you were sharing. Let me ask you a question first. How many people here, hands up, have been criticized, made fun of, or insulted because of your views? Wow. Okay, all right. This is for all of you and everybody else who's worried about what might happen to you because of your political views in today's America. Imagine a young boy. He's 15 years old. And he's experienced the horrors of war. In this case, he grew up in Hungary, in Budapest, a beautiful city in Central Europe. They called it the Paris of the East. And he was 9 when World War II erupted. By the end of the war, his home city was devastated. 3 out of 5 buildings had been bombed. 3 out of 5. As the Nazis were surrounded at the end of the war, they blew up every single bridge over the Danube. It was devastated. But this young boy finally one day had hope. He had a sense of a brighter future after years of death and destruction. Why? Because he heard the great men, the Prime Minister of England, the President of America, and the Soviet Premier had sat down in a faraway city called Yalta, and they'd come to a peace agreement. And in that peace agreement, the devastated countries that had been occupied by the Nazis were guaranteed their freedom. Guaranteed their freedom. They would be allowed to have elections. They would be allowed to choose their own governments again, to be independent. So he had hope. But then what happened? If you know your history, in the next 3 years, wherever the Soviet troops had ended up after the war, which was all through Central Europe, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, Hungary, you name it, Russia took control. This isn't theory. This isn't somebody spouting off socialist theory at a rally. It was real life. If you stood against the socialists, you'd be intimidated. If you kept standing up against them, you'd be beaten up. And if you didn't give up, you'd be killed. So by 1948, when he started college, his country was again occupied, taken over, not run by Nazis, but run by communists. One party, controlling everything, reporting back to Moscow. It had become a satellite, a slave nation, like all the others in the region. So what did this young man do? He said, I'm going to resist. As he started college, he says, I'm going to fight back. But not with a gun, not with a bomb, but with information. So he found 8 like-minded patriots, Christians, in college. And he created a secret student organization, an underground organization. that was going to spy on what the Russians were doing, how they were stealing his country for Moscow, and then send that information out to the West, to some free country that could potentially use that information against the dictatorship in Moscow. And they were very successful. They found a man who had freedom of passage across the Iron Curtain, who smuggled their information, and this isn't a joke, written in invisible ink, in innocuous letters between the innocuous lines. They'd write in the sensitive information. He'd smuggle it out to Vienna. And then he established contact with a Western intelligence agency. In this case, it was MI6, the British equivalent of the CIA. And they said, here's the information, use it to undermine Moscow and to try and get Hungary to be free again. The bad news was, once that information arrived at MI6 headquarters, it worked its way up the chain to a certain man. That man was colloquially known as Kim Philby. Look him up one day after your conference, because Kim Philby is one of the 5 greatest traitors of the Judeo-Christian civilization in recent history. He was a member of something called the Cambridge Apostles, a group of British students who had been recruited by the forerunner of the KGB in college, and they worked their way into British government, into the intelligence services, to work for Moscow, to help our sworn enemies. So he was very happy to get these reports, because then he could help identify who these patriots are. And he allowed the cell to run for another 8 months until he could identify the name of every single patriot, every single student. And then he sent a secret message to his handler, who sent it back to Moscow, to the KGB, with the names of all the students. Two years later, the young man was now 20. At 2 a.m., there was a violent banging on the door of his parents' home. In burst the communist secret police and arrested him. They took him away to the headquarters of the secret police, a beautiful mansion in downtown Budapest, where in the basement they relentlessly tortured him for being a patriot, physical torture. He ended up being put through a show trial, a communist show trial, and at the age of 20 being given a life sentence in prison for what he believed, because he was a patriot. He spent 2 years in solitary. Now think about that for a second. Not 2 weeks, not 2 months, 2 years without human contact. Then 2 years down a prison coal mine where he was breaking coal off the surface of the mine as a political prisoner. And then another 2 years in the central political prison until the glorious events of 1956 and October, which are known as the Hungarian Revolution, where a bunch of students, again, and factory workers said, enough, we've had enough of communism. And after 8 years of dictatorship, they stood up to their slave masters and they fought for freedom with Molotov cocktails, with hunting shotguns, with cobblestones. And for 10 glorious days, that slave nation was free. One of the things the freedom fighters did is they captured a Soviet tank. And they thought, what can we do with the Soviet tank? We can't take on hundreds of tanks, we'll just be blown away. Let's use it to liberate our comrades who are locked in political prison. So they took the tank, they drove it to the political prison, they bust down the gates, and they went through the whole prison liberating those who had been imprisoned for their beliefs. And that young man was freed. A few days later, the revolution was crushed. Hundreds of tanks came in from Romania and the Ukraine. Thousands of troops, Russians, came in to crush that young revolution. And that man was very, very aware of what would happen if he were caught. They wouldn't put him back in prison. He was an escaped political prisoner. He'd be shot on sight and kicked into the gutter. So he had no choice. I have to leave the land that I love. But he remembered a promise he'd made 3 years before in prison to a slightly older prisoner who said to him, "Hey, Paul, if you ever get out of here, will you promise me something? Will you take my teenage daughter to freedom? Get her out of here." And Paul, who thought he was going to die in prison, said, "Sure, George, whatever." But then he was free, and he remembered his promise to George. So just before he left the country, he looked up, there used to be a thing called telephone books, long before you were born. Looked up George's address, his old address in the phone book, walked across Budapest to his house, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, it's me, I'm Paul. I'm leaving now. I've got to get out of here. I'm on a shoot-to-kill list. Where's your daughter?" He met a 17-year-old girl called Susan underneath a train, clinging on for life. They made it to the western border with Austria. They gave their last dime to a local farmer who showed them the route through the minefield. They tripped the flare. The border guards almost got them, but they made it to freedom and to a refugee camp. Now, what has that got to do with you? The story 70 years ago. A long way away in Europe. Because I want to share with you why I do what I do, why I decided to work for President Trump, why I called out that lying, abusive punk Brian Karem in the Rose Garden. Why I believe that Turning Point USA is the most important organization in America today fighting for our freedom. It's the Heritage Foundation, it's the NRA, it's Turning Point USA. So you want to know why I shared that story with you? Because Paul was my father. Thank you. And Susan became his wife and my mother. And they spent weeks in a refugee camp. So this thing on the border, this is personal for me. Because in the refugee camp, they were interviewed again and again and again. And they had to prove that they weren't a threat to the West. They had to prove that they wanted to support the constitutional order of the country they moved to. They didn't come across illegally to become a threat to the country, to sponge off the taxpayer, and they became patriots in the UK, where I was born. So, how does this affect me and how does it affect you? When I worked in the White House, very soon I was put on the front line in the media to defend the president and his policies. As soon as that happened, the big guns came out. I had one journalist write 42 hit pieces on me, calling me a Nazi, a fascist, a white supremacist. Fake news indeed. And I got it. I'm a proxy for the president. They thought Hillary was going to win. They hate me, so they're going to take it out on me so they can feel better. Baby. But then they came after my family. They came after my wife. They came after the reputation of my dead mother. Yeah, they started writing about my dead mother. And then, so you can relate, the same journalist who wrote the 42 hit pieces wrote an article about my son in high school in the headline calling him a traitor. Right? They are cowards. They are cowards. And they're un-American. And so there I am thinking, is this worth it? Is this worth it? To have a government paycheck and to have the quote-unquote media attack not just me, I get it, I'm a politically commissioned officer of the president, I understand, but my wife, my mother, and my teenage son? And then I remembered a story from my childhood. I lived an amazing life in England. My parents were great. We did well. We were safe. And they were very worldly. And every year we'd go traveling for vacation, often to France. And there was one vacation. I might have been 7 or 8 years old. And I was on the beach playing, with my G.I. Joes or whatever. And my dad, who was an incredible athlete, when he was arrested, he was on the national crew team. He was, amazing physical man, loved to swim, loved sports. And he was in the ocean, and he comes out of the ocean after a swim, and I'm sitting there, oblivious, playing in the sand. And I see something on my dad that I hadn't realized before. I see that he's got these white lines on his wrists. And he's way too young to have wrinkles on his wrists. So like a fool, like a little kid, I said, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" With no emotion, without skipping a beat, he looks at me and says, "Son, that's where the secret police bound my wrists together with wire behind my back so they could hang me from the roof, from the ceiling of the torture chamber." That's when my life changed, at the age of 8. Sometimes you can really see a moment where your life takes another path. For me, that was it. Why? Because I knew from that moment onward, evil isn't some idea from a fairy tale about witches in forests and dragons. Evil is real and it walks the earth. And when they came after me in the White House, I remembered that story. And I looked at my wrists, and there were no scars. So I said to myself, Washington Post, CNN, HuffPo, BuzzFeed, bring it. Because at the end of the day, it's only words. And our job demands that if my dad can put up with that, guess what? So can we. It's not theoretical. It is frightening today. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation does a poll every year. Last year's poll found that 52% of millennials in America would prefer to live in a socialist or communist America. That is why I commend all of you, and that is why I tell you, never, ever give up. In your darkest moment, when they're attacking you on Instagram, when they're attacking you on social media, when, like my daughter, they're putting posters up in your college calling you a white supremacist because of your last name, think about the 100 million people murdered in the name of Karl Marx and never give up. We are blessed. We are blessed. I am a legal immigrant to the United States. I chose this country. I am not American by accident. I chose it because it is the greatest nation in the world. So, I want you to take heart. It's easy for me to fight. I just think of my dad. But think of everybody else who's suffered. Think of the people who've risked their lives to come here. Think of the people who protect our nation right now. In your darkest moment, never forget them and take energy from them. Take passion. I'll take questions. Last thing. If you want to know more about my story and my parents' story and why I believe what I believe and what I did in the White House, you can read it all in my book, Why We Fight. Thank you. Check it out, Why We Fight. If you want to know more, my website is sebgorka.com, SEBGORKA, sebgorka.com. You can reach me through that website as well. My radio show is America First, and my Twitter feed is Seb Gorka, SEBGORKA. Last note, and I'll take questions. Remember one thing. When it gets tough, when it gets personal, when you feel like crying, when you feel like giving up, when you think you're alone, remember one thing. There is one crucial difference between us and them. We are fueled by love. Irrespective of our skin color, our gender, our sexual preference, it doesn't matter. We are all fueled by love. Love of our country and love of liberty. They are fueled by hate. And that's why we will always win.
Hi, my name is Matthew Balfour. I'm from Maine. I hear time again, I find the big liberal lie or the big left lies very interesting. And the one I keep hearing more and more recently is that the socialist policies of Europe are not as far left as we think, and that they're very central, and that we're so far to the right that they seem radical, when in fact we're the radical ones. Which obviously I would strongly disagree with. What's your thought on that?
So all this stuff, like Bernie says, oh, they're socialist countries, is garbage. All the countries of Europe, to a lesser or greater extent, are welfare states that are built on capitalism. When you have the Danish Prime Minister actually tell Bernie Sanders when he's at Harvard, will you stop calling my country socialist? We're a capitalist democracy, right? Listen to the guy. Secondly, these are systems that are crumbling. The welfare states are becoming absolutely internally bankrupt because how did they get created? They were all created after World War II on the basis of what? US subsidies and mercantilism. Stockholm, Sweden, Denmark were massively powerful mercantilist nations. They made their money by being capitalists across the globe. Remember, right? The East India Company. And then what happened? They've spent it all. And now they're spending it on illegal immigrants. They're going bankrupt. So again, at the end of the day, You have to inform them, but I'll give you one piece of advice for everybody. This is the biggest mistake we make as conservatives. Don't rely on the facts, because they don't care, right? Ben Shapiro's right. You know, they just don't get it. So you've got to pump it with emotion as well. Like the wall. People ask me, how do you argue about the wall? Very easy. Do you know how many women and children are being raped? Who are being trafficked? Do you know how much money the cartels make? Do you care about women getting raped and children being abused? Oh, you do? Well, let's build the wall. Right? Next question. Go ahead. I'll hear it. It's nice and loud.
My name's Steven, and I was curious how you think the situation with Iran right now will play out.
Nobody knows. Anybody who says is a liar. All I can tell you right now is they're tanking. The economy is collapsing. These things they're doing in the Straits of Hormuz are a sign of desperation. It's what I call rusty saber rattling. At the end of the day, they will cave because Donald Trump will never give up.
Hi there. Hi there.
Hi.
My name's Gabe. I'm from Oregon.
Hi.
All right. So I just want to thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate it. And I wanted to ask you a question that's not necessarily about politics.
Guys, get to the question.
Okay.
Get
So,
to the question.
what would you say is a great tip for productivity in general life? Like, what would you say you do that makes you so productive?
Good question. Wow.
He's going to be the last question over there. So.
Two things. Number one, always set goals. Don't expect to be able to meet them, but if you don't have a plan, you're not going to know where you're even heading. So always have a plan, always have goals, set goals. And secondly, and this is a little bit weird if you're asking about productivity, but I say this to everybody. I don't care what career you're interested in. Read books. Books! Now, I'm the last one to talk. I spend, 6 hours a day on social media, but at the end of the day, turn the bloody phone off for an hour, okay? Put it down, switch off the computer, and read a real book. Because if you start reading real books, and classics, got classics. Within a year, if you read real books, you will have a competitive edge over everybody else who isn't reading, and you will be far more effective.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
So what did you ask the president at the social media summit last week? The live stream got cut off.
Yeah. What did I ask him? I asked him, what is his message to every one of our followers? Can we keep the lights up? I have one request. So can we keep the lights up in the room? Thank you. Because he said the White House had done the math, and the 150 of us social media influencers in the room had a combined audience of 500 million. Right? So we, the alternative media, were bigger than any platform out there. Bigger than BBC, bigger than anybody. And I wanted to ask him, so what should we tell our followers? And it was great. It was biblical. He said, you are accessing 500 million patriots. You are more powerful than anybody else. So they're trying to censor you, they're trying to deplatform you, but don't be afraid. All right, guys, check out the show, check out the book. If you want to reach me, go to sebgorka.com. Please follow me on Twitter. And since my old boss loves these, can I ask for a selfie? Can you get up? Thumbs up, everyone. Can we kill some of the stage lights? There we go. All right, guys. God bless you.
Mr. Cohen, you signed it.
They're talking about me as being non-governmental.
And right, it says foreign agency. It says foreign contracts. Do you want us to read it to you?
Or should I say, good morning, deplorables. I love it. All right, we're going to have a good time. We're going to tell a few stories. I'm going to answer your questions, but I want to just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming to Washington, D.C. and making sure that Washington, D.C. is yours and not anybody else's. I appreciate it. And more importantly for me, thank you for supporting our greatest president in the history of this country, Donald J. Trump. I tell you what. Now, my good friend Jim Jordan, Jim would say that I need to bring the diesel this morning. That's what he says when he talks about making sure that you actually bring the message. He says you got to bring the diesel. So here's what I want to make sure that we do. You know, we're only a few blocks right here from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You know, we're very close. Now, I can tell you that it wasn't too long ago that I was on the campaign trail with then candidate Donald Trump. And nobody thought he was going to win. You know, the polls, CNN, MSNBC. Now, I know none of you watch them. No one believed that Donald J. Trump would win. And yet, what happened was across this country, I heard somebody earlier is from Oregon. I'm glad that you're here. We know that we have half of the conservatives here from Oregon now that you're here. But no one believed it, whether it was from California to North Carolina or from Maine to Florida or in between. Nobody believed that this president was going to be elected. So I was actually on his plane back then. You know, he had this pretty nice plane that had Trump on the side of his plane. Now, this is the only president that went backwards when he actually got Air Force One. I'm just telling you, his personal airplane was pretty nice. And so we get on this and we're flying and we fly because in North Carolina, it was one of those battleground states. I happened to be a member of Congress from there. And because no one thought he would win, a lot of the other elected officials didn't want to campaign with him. They were going to let him do it all on his own. And, you know, they said, well, you know, you're on your own, Donald Trump. Well, guess how many of them are now wishing that they had campaigned with the President of the United States? All of them. You're exactly right. So sometimes you have to get involved even when the outlook doesn't look that great. And that's why you being here is so critically important. Now, I'm here in front of you. I never wanted to be a member of Congress. It was never on my bucket list because I was a pretty shy individual. Now, I'm up here speaking to you, and there's lights glaring. Yesterday, there were so many cameras. I was actually sitting right beside Robert Mueller's attorney yesterday when actually, well, it was a good day for Republicans yesterday, wouldn't you say? So as I watched that, you know, it was never on my bucket list because I was like you. I was a student. I was, you know, all I wanted to do is actually love my country, make a living. Well, not just a living. I wanted to make a really good living. And yet I did that. I lived the American dream because I'm a nobody from nowhere. I didn't come from a well-connected family. I didn't have an accent like Sebastian Gorka, you know, where I could actually talk like, you know, I have this unbelievable accent that makes people, you know, people just fall in love with his accent, don't they? You know, I'm from North Carolina. Oh, I tell you, I appreciate it. You know the difference between North Carolina and South Carolina? It's better. Well, I like the way you're thinking, but actually in South Carolina, it takes 4 syllables to say hello, and it only takes 3 in North Carolina. You know, we talk just a little bit faster than South Carolina, but a whole lot slower than New York. Wouldn't you agree? All right, so here's the thing is, it wasn't on my bucket list. I can remember I had lived the American dream. I had made a very good living, and yet I was concerned that my country, that we were losing it, that the liberal left was taking it over, that Washington, D.C. no longer represented the values that I held dear. And I can remember praying about it, and my wife and I, we were praying, well, should I run for Congress? I got the answer I believed. I can remember still, I was driving in part of the district. I got that answer. I felt like there was a calling to run for office. Now, I had a great company. I really didn't want for anything. And yet I felt like we needed to sacrifice that and run for office. So when I made that decision, I called my wife and I said, honey, I'm feeling like I'm led to run to be a member of Congress. She said, honey, I support you 100%. And I then got physically ill, had to pull over on the side of the road and throw up. I didn't want it. And you know what? When I got here, I realized that Washington, D.C. was in a lot worse shape than I ever imagined it to be. You know, because a lot of people campaign. You've heard them. Actually, you've campaigned for candidates, haven't you? How many of you have actually knocked doors or made phone calls or volunteered? A lot of you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a part of it. But what happens is they campaign one way and they come up here and act another way, don't they? It is time that we make sure that they have a backbone of steel. It is time. Some members of Congress have a backbone like a banana. It has good shape until you peel it back and you realize it's pretty mushy. Don't you think it's time that we take back this country for the values that we hold dear and make sure that America indeed is first again? It is time that we take it back. So as I look out and I see all of you out there, I can tell you there are congressmen and women, there are senators, in fact, there could even be a future president in our midst. And yet, you are many times ridiculed, scorned. In fact, when you speak up for your values, what happens in your particular school or campus? What do? They try to shut you down, but will they ever shut you down if you're willing to stand? Are they going to hear you at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue when you're willing to stand up for America and what makes America great? Are they going to hear you? So do you mind if I tell you one story about the president? Is that now you all got to hear the president in person is what I heard, right? I'm telling you, he doesn't normally just do that. Charlie Kirk has real good connections. I just want to let you know that. Charlie is not only a friend of the president's, but he's a friend of mine. We were actually texting back and forth yesterday. We were trying to work it out for y'all to come to the Capitol to actually support the president during the Mueller investigation, and the Capitol Police were not willing to give you a permit. And I was afraid that if you came to the Capitol, you might get arrested. Now, I know a lot of you would have thought that was a real thrill. I figured that. But I told Charlie that as much as you might have thought it was a thrill, your parents would not. And so I just want to say thank you for being willing to stay in the fight. And I can tell you that when you stay in the fight and you've got a president in the Oval Office like this particular president, it makes a big difference. So a true story that actually happened really early on in the presidential administration early on. Reince Priebus was still the chief of staff at that particular point. And I went over there because I was a little concerned, because the president gets in, and what happens is the swamp here will suck you in. The swamp tries to change just about everybody. And you're here now, and we call it the swamp. Some of the politicians here, they think it's a hot tub. They love being here. And yet the president was here, and I can remember one particular day I went in, and I was actually talking to Reince Priebus, and I said, Reince, the president needs to do this, and the president needs to do that. And I was just really being very direct and forthright. And as I was looking at that, I was being very passionate in the way that I communicated. And so I left the White House. I got in the car. Actually, my wife was waiting for me in the car. We took off, and about 20 minutes down the road, I get a phone call from Reince Priebus. Reince says, "Mark, where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm almost back to my apartment." And he says, "Well, can you turn around and come back and tell the president what you just told us?" Well, now my first thought, because I'd been pretty passionate, is, you work for the president, why don't you tell him? But I said, sure, I'll be glad to tell the president. And so I wasn't quite back yet. I stopped, and I got my wife to get an Uber to get her all the way back to the apartment. And I turned around, I came back, and as I came back, I come walking into the Oval Office, and it's the first time that I'd ever been in the Oval Office. A Republican member didn't get invited a lot under Obama. I want to just a news flash there for you. And so as I'm there, I walk into the Oval Office, and actually the president wasn't in the Oval Office. He was in a little side office that's right opposite of it, where he does a lot of his reading and work. And as he's there, he said, "Mark, come on in. Come on in. One of my favorite congressmen." Well, I know that I had campaigned with him, but I was a little nervous. I was going to have to tell him something that I had been real passionate about, thinking that the president needed to do something. And so I go in and I start advocating very directly with the president of the United States. I said, "Mr. President, you need to do this and you need to do that." And as I'm doing that and I'm talking to him, I'm looking down, and he notices that I'm distracted. Because right in front of the president was about a 12-inch block of wood with a red button in the middle of it. And so I would talk to him, and I'd look down at that red button. I'd talk to him and look down at the red button. Finally, he says, "It makes you nervous, doesn't it?" I said, "Oh, no, it doesn't make me nervous." And so I continued to advocate just a little bit, and I looked down at that red button again, and finally, he hits the red button. My eyes get as big as silver dollars. I'm looking for incoming from anywhere, and I'm going, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? And out of this closet, to my right, comes this Marine dressed in full uniform. And he puts a Diet Coke right there in front of the President of the United States. I go, "Mr. President, that is pretty neat." He says, "You want to see it again?" Boom, there was one for me. He has such a great sense of humor. He really does. And that day I was surprised, but there I was, a nobody from nowhere, drinking a Diet Coke with the President of the United States. So when your fellow colleagues and students tell you that it is not possible for you to do anything extraordinary, just remind them that you heard about a story of a nobody from nowhere that had a Diet Coke with the President of the United States. Now, I say that because I was there advocating for something that was very, very important to me. And you are far too young to know who Paul Harvey was, but you can Google it and find it. He used to say, "And the rest of the story." And the rest of the story is this. Here I was that particular day advocating that we should move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and indeed, this president did it. This president did it. This president delivered on his promise. So, a nobody from nowhere getting to be a part of history, something that every other presidential candidate had promised, but only this president, Donald J. Trump, actually got it done. Only this president. But there's also another little part of the story that many of you don't know about, because we get to see the fact that we have unemployment at record lows, an economy that is thriving, regulations that have been slashed, truly a change in Washington, D.C. that is unparalleled. And we see an embassy, we've got a real evidence of his commitment to those promises, because we have an embassy that is in Jerusalem, which ultimately is a sign to the rest of the world that this president is a promise-keeping president. He really is a promise-keeping president. But there's another little part of the story, because in the room just next to where the president and I had our Diet Coke together was a huge whiteboard. And on that whiteboard was every single campaign promise he made, when he had made it, and he was going down checking them off one at a time. This president is serious about getting it done. He is serious. So I share that story with you to let you know that there is a calling on each one of your lives. There is a special, unique calling, and what I ask you to do is, when that still small voice tells you and nudges you to get involved or stay involved or do something that may make you so sick that you have to pull over on the side of the road and throw up, that if you're willing to be obedient and dare to dream that impossible things are possible in this greatest country that we have the privilege of calling home, that I can tell you that not with just this nobody from nowhere, but with you from somewhere that you call home, he will use you in a way that candidly will transform our country. And so on behalf of the President of the United States, who knows that he gets his support and that it is not easy to get support from people in your generation with the kind of pressures that you face, I want to say thank you. Thank you for staying involved in a fight to make America first, to make America great again, and to keep America great. God bless you. I'm ready for some of your questions. Thank you so much. We love you guys. Wow, the energy is unbelievable. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I see that we're queuing up here. And so if they're really hard questions, I'm going to let somebody else answer them. But go ahead with the easy questions.
My name is Ralph Cura. I'm from Parkland, Florida, where the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting happened. And currently there's a bill in the Senate. It's called the Eagles Act, and it's to expand the Secret Service's threat detection wing, which would help identify future school shooters and people like that. And I was wondering if, when the time comes to vote for it in the House, would you support that bill?
You know, I would have to look at it. What I'm willing to do, I can tell you this, is we need to make sure that schools are a safe place to not only learn, but also to gather. And what we've done is we've done a poor job. One of the big things that I saw is that the federal government, the FBI in that particular case, had a number of warnings where they could have stopped things. And so what we need to make sure is not only the envelope is there, but if that is something where we have an extra layer of security and protection, I'm all in, willing to do it. Actually, one of the first bills I actually sponsored as a freshman member of Congress was one to expand our school resource officers to make sure that we had people on campuses, whether they're elementary schools or high schools or college campuses. And so I'm not familiar with that exact piece of legislation, but it sounds like it's consistent with something that I can support. And if we can get it out of the Senate, I'll be glad to support it in the House. But thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay. All right. Over to my left. I don't go to my left very often, but I'll go to my left to take your question.
Thank you. My name is Brandon Whiproad from Wyoming. So my question is about immigration and specifically people that are under the Dreamers Act. How would we handle that situation for people who have only lived in America and have only known this land when their parents brought them over illegally?
Yeah, so a lot of the immigration debate really gets focused on the Dreamers, and really the immigration crisis that we have at the border is not because of Dreamers, it's because we have an open border that we have to close down, not just from a standpoint of immigration, but from a standpoint of security. And so a number of us have been willing to look at the prerequisite is to have a secure southern border. And if we have a secure southern border, I think what we can do is look at a finite number of Dreamers or anyone who has come here and is here in the United States. Deporting Dreamers is not necessarily the thing that even conservatives support. I can tell you that there's a compassionate part of even my most radical conservative right-wing colleagues on that particular issue. But here's the problem. We've talked about it for a long time, and we've done nothing in Congress. You can go back to Ronald Reagan's time, and what we essentially did was give amnesty without securing our border. And so as we look at that and talking to the president, it's about getting a good border security. Yes, I do agree we need to build the wall, and we need to make sure that we do that. But I can tell you, when we had 144,000 people that came across our southern border just in the month of June, you know, when you start looking at it with these trends, you're from Wyoming. Well, we had enough people come across our southern border in 1 month that inside of a year, we would have had 2.5 Wyomings that just came across our southern border in 1 year. So we've got to get control of that. And I think once we do that, dealing with the Dreamers in a compassionate way becomes much easier. But it's a great question.
Hi, so I'm Christian from Pennsylvania. I actually admire you standing up for the president. So my question is, we only have you. It feels like Doug Collins from Georgia and Jim Jordan. We had Trey Gowdy, but we lost him. So what can we do to get more Republican members of Congress to have the passion of you and Trey and Doug? Because I feel like the other side has 50-1 on our side.
Well, they do have a lot more, you know, but let me just tell you, I will take me and Jim Jordan and Doug Collins and Devin Nunes and a few others supporting the president with the power of all of you behind me versus all of them without you. I like my odds. So here's what we have to do. We have to encourage more of my colleagues to come here and actually feel the energy that's in the room, because you're the next generation, one. The second part of that is you need to help them see the light. But if they don't see the light, they need to feel the heat. And y'all need to get on the phones and call them and say, it's time that you stand up for the president. You know, it's real easy right now to stand up for the president because he's winning. But you know what? What happens is there's a whole lot of people, they're afraid that if the president stands for this and they don't, that they're going to get thrown out of office. So here's another way that we can do it. Let's get behind term limits and make sure that we have term limits and throw the bums out. I mean, let's throw them out if we can. If they're not willing to stand up for the president, they've got no business standing in Congress. All right? That's my thought. But get on the phones. Listen, I know this is a newsflash to all of you, but when you call in, we don't have a little caller ID that says how old you are. All right, so call in over and over and over again. What happened, my chief of staff is behind us right here. Your first phone calls go to the interns. They take all the incoming. They take, in my office, a lot more colorful language than perhaps some other offices. You know, I'm like enemy number one to the left. You know, if you look at the left blogs, don't go out and look at it, because all the things they say about me are, well, it's deplorable. But here's what we need to do. If you keep calling, what happens? The interns get busy, and then it goes over to the legislative staff, and eventually it gets to the chief of staff. And if the chief of staff gets 1 or 2 phone calls, he comes out and says, listen, we got a problem here. And so if they're not supporting the president, and I'm talking about our party not supporting the president, they need to hear from all of you, because you're doing the door knocking and the campaigning and all of that. They need you more than really they realize. So thank you so much. All right.
Hi, I'm Cooper Stevens. I live in West North Carolina, and I just wanted to know...
Where in Western North Carolina?
Hickory.
All right, God bless you. Now, so for all of you that don't know North Carolina, it is literally 12 hours from one part of North Carolina to the far end of North Carolina. So when he says he's in Hickory in the western part, he is correct. There's another 3.5 hours to the west of Hickory, but thank you for being here. Go ahead.
I actually wanted to know how it could help in campaigning and all that, to like get either Trump or our local Republicans further in their like race, like in their not presidential, but their political race.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing is with the local Republican Party there is pretty active. Are you in Catawba County? Yes. All right, so in Catawba County, they've got a pretty active group. We have active in Burke and Caldwell, which is very close. But I can tell you, North Carolina is one of those states the president's going to come back a number of times. He'll be in the western part, whether it's in Hickory or Asheville, he'll be close enough. And then once you do that, we can help feed that out. So if you'll just get with us, we'll connect you with everybody. But it's a great question, and thank you for being willing to volunteer. Yeah. I got 1 minute and 32 seconds left. So.
Last question, yeah.
Hi, my name is Olivia Crow, and I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I was wondering what you would like to happen that hasn't happened yet.
What would I like to happen that hasn't happened? That's a long list, and it's going to take more than 1 minute and 9 seconds, but I'll give you my top three. One is we do need to secure the border. It's time that we get serious about that, all right? The second thing we need to do is it relates to health care. We need to make sure that health care is once again affordable and prescription drug prices come down. And then the last thing, which we're going to go the opposite way today, sadly, with a vote later today, we need to shrink the size of government and empower every single person in here, where it's not the power of the federal government, but that it's the power at the local and state government where the real living happens. So those are the things that we have to do. Those are the things. Thank you so much. So I'm going to close in the final 18 seconds with this. Here's a challenge. Guys, you are on Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat more than any of the colleagues on Capitol Hill. You can take a message that actually will get picked up very quickly. And if you will continue to be bold and to make sure that your message is taken to your colleagues, it won't stop there. Because when something starts to trend on Twitter, guess what? They have to talk about it on MSNBC and CNN and Fox and everywhere else. They have to talk about it. And your power of being able to come together and work very hard will make a difference in this country. I'm so hopeful and so excited because of the energy that's in this room. In fact, when I was with the president yesterday, we were talking about all of you. And he says, you know what, if there's one thing I know, that if I called on the folks that are there over at the Turning Point gathering, they will march on Capitol Hill in a second, and that's the kind of confidence. God bless you. We love you. Thank you so much. We love you. God bless you. With the best shot.
They're not suppressing us, and they're targeting you, they target us, and they'll target just about all of us right of center and who service a right of center audience, not because we're getting things wrong. They're targeting us because we're getting things right.
Morning, everyone. I'm Alexander Marlow. I'm the editor-in-chief of Breitbart.com, and I'd like for all of you, I'd love for all of you guys to see a short video. Let it rip.
CPAC has got to go! Behave yourself! 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 You are freaks and animals! You're freaks and animals! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away!
Now, what is it that we just saw? This is multiple choice. This is multiple choice. Did we see a merry prankster trash talking to a bunch of far-left radicals? Did we see a madman, righteously indignant, perhaps a little bit crazed, but genuinely furious over what's happening in a far-left movement? Or C, did we see a genius strategist who's manipulating the fake news media into acknowledging what were serial violence perpetrated by a left-wing movement? Or, I'm hearing it in the audience already, D, all of the above. That's correct. That's correct. That's Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart was my boss, my mentor, and the founder of Breitbart.com. And I want to break down for you the genius that you just witnessed in that freakout. And I admit it was a freakout, but it was straight out of his playbook. And this is a playbook that you guys can take back to your personal lives and to your campuses. I want to give you these tools today so that you're better equipped to fight for America and to fight against the left. So for me, just introduce myself. If you're not familiar with me, I'm Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart. I grew up in West Los Angeles. I went to prep school just outside of Hollywood. They're very embarrassed I went there. I went to college at UC Berkeley, which is where I met Andrew at a conference just like this one. And he gave a speech about how culture is upstream from politics. Now, what does that mean? It's something you guys have probably heard a lot since, but he was the first guy talking about it. It wasn't that the people in Washington are leading the culture, leading the media, leading the entertainment industry. It was, in fact, the exact opposite, is that the radical ideas would foment on our campuses, in our press, and in Hollywood, and then those ideas would get put into law by our congresspeople and eventually the president with President Obama. And Andrew saw this a mile away, and he was the first guy to talk about it. So I latched onto him very quickly, started working for him when I was 21, and I've been editor-in-chief of Breitbart for the past 5 years. Now, Breitbart, largely thanks to you guys and people like you, we have 20 million readers, and we were the #1 media outlet on social media in the 2016 election. Thank you. So just a quick aside from yesterday and how dominant conservatives are on social media right now, which is why we call them the masters of the universe, or Breitbart, our tech elite, why they hate us so much. We were looking at these social scores on Facebook for a huge news day, right? The Mueller hearings yesterday. It was a #1 on all of social media, Fox News. #2 on all of social media, Breitbart News. #3 on social media, this is the best part. This is the best part. The personal page of President Donald John Trump. And #4, fake news CNN. So Fox, Breitbart, and Trump beat ABC, NBC, CNN, all of the left-wing establishment media outlets. It was quite a news day, wasn't it? Yesterday, they were going to get the orange man. They were finally going to get him. But they all got trumped again because Mueller had brought the low energy. We're bringing the high energy today. And a lot of that comes from Andrew. That was Andrew's spirit. He grew up in Hollywood, and he became a conservative largely due to talk radio and just sort of how icky and dishonest the left can be. He worked at the Drudge Report for many years, and he even founded the Huffington Post. He worked for Arianna Huffington for a while as a researcher. She was more right-wing at the time. And what she did is Andrew gave her the idea, well, why don't you get all your crazy left-wing friends to write blog posts, and then the left will love it, and the right will make fun of it, and so it'll be a win-win. And it was a pretty genius idea, so it worked out pretty well. But I want to go back to the video here. So you're probably wondering who he's yelling at. And in this case, it actually doesn't really matter. It happened to be Occupy Wall Street, who were protesters. But if you're really interested, Andrew made a documentary about them called Occupy Unmasked. I would recommend that. But it really doesn't matter because leftist movements are largely interchangeable. They tend to promote the same core values, mostly that America is a crap country, and they do so in the same sort of semi-violent, agitated way, and they're funded by the exact same people, which is crucial. So these protesters are the exact same people as you would see in Antifa, and many of them are literally the same exact people. But the key thing here is they're largely supported by the media and by the Democrats. It's very hard to get negative attention to them, and that's what Andrew was trying to do in this video. So what you need to know is that Andrew took this as a moment, and it was outside of the CPAC conference about 7 years ago, a moment to fight back. So here are some of the tools. So the first thing he did is he needed to use the culture. He knew that the media is the message. So if he could get himself on camera talking, maybe even screaming about Occupy and how they needed to behave themselves, then the media would have to cover it. And they would have to cover these key facts that they were badly behaved. And eventually he starts yelling, stop raping people, stop raping people, stop raping the people. I love how he added the article, it's really brilliant. You guys should see the whole thing on YouTube. And the crucial thing is that Occupy did have a history of violence. We documented at Breitbart over 400 examples of violence by Occupy, again, a precursor to Antifa, in a 2-month period. We had a whole rap sheet. These things were largely ignored by national news. Now, local news covers them, but national news missed it. So this was Andrew's idea. How are they going to cover it? Well, we'll start off by I'm going to scream at them, and then the media will start covering me. So Andrew also, this is lesson 2 for you guys. He knew his opponent. He knew the left better than the left knew themselves. Remember, he grew up in Hollywood. He lived with these people. He worked with these people. He knew their arguments. He knew their attitudes. He knew all their tendencies. He even knew their favorite cocktails. He went to a lot of cocktail parties with the left. It was the Appletini at the time. I think that's out now. I don't think anyone has those anymore. So he knew that group, and he didn't need to bother reasoning with them. That was key. He knew he had to fight with them. But this is the key lesson, number 3. Andrew walked towards the fire. He was a man of deep principle, and he knew in his heart that accepting challenges, especially if it meant defending one's values and principles publicly, was the only option. It's difficult and sometimes even impossible and even dangerous, but Andrew was the original new media warrior. And time and again, he took on the left head on, and he walked right into the fray. So what does this mean for you? It means that you must know and understand the leftist arguments better than they do. When they go on offense, you go on offense, and then you stay on offense. And when the snowflakes start melting, and they will melt, that's when you turn it up a notch. President Reagan said, when you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. I think this generation understands that even better than my generation or any previous generations on the right. The left is going to call you names, you know that. They'll trash talk you. But when they punch you, you're going to punch back twice as hard, but you're also going to punch back smarter. 10 times smarter if you can. And here's our message to the campus social justice warriors that do want to silence you. We're not going to sit down. We're not going to shut up. And we will defeat you. So here's what they don't want you to know. The only time progressives end up winning is when we stay silent. So you guys aren't going to stay silent. You're going to be loud. You're going to be smart. And most importantly, just like Andrew, you're going to be fearless, and you're going to walk into the fire. So as you guys can imagine, that clip was effective. It worked. The internet immediately started talking about Andrew Breitbart's Occupy DC freakout. I know this because I read a headline in the Atlantic magazine. The web is talking about Andrew Breitbart's Occupy DC freakout. Okay, good. So it worked. It had its desired effect. And the conversation started with, here's crazy Andrew. Look at him. He's being crazy. But it ended up with the truth. It ended up people being exposed, many for the first time, at how radical this movement was, how violent they were, how fascist they were, and also how stinky they were. They were very smelly people. Very, very smelly. And Andrew knew that the narrative wasn't going to be framed by the establishment media. And this is something that you guys also get very well. He knew the people, we the people, would end up framing the way this story was told. So you guys all have a political weapon in your pocket right now. At least most of you do. Hopefully it's in silent mode at the moment because I'm talking here. But this is the most powerful political tool the right has ever had. Why? First of all, you can start taking video footage. Second of all, you can start tweeting, start sharing, uploading to whatever social media platforms haven't banned you yet. This is all stuff, it's all power, it's all at your fingertips, and Andrew saw this before anyone else. He used to tell audiences to take out their phones, raise them in the air, and he envisioned what would be a digital army of citizen journalists, regular people empowered by technology to do an end run around the establishment press. So imagine how excited he'd be to see a group like you guys here today, all who grew up in social media and know how to use it to your advantage. So your campuses are fertile journalistic ground. Record crazy rallies, video the nutty leftists, capture the progressives in their natural habitat. And then you can send them to me at alex@breitbart.com or just post them on your own online, because nothing is more damaging to the left than their own words. So we all headed back online after the video, and we got to our battle stations, started putting out blog posts, videos, tweeting, sharing. But Andrew wasn't done. Occupy might have been fading away, but the left often rejuvenates itself, much like a zombie, or perhaps a Clinton, or a Russian collusion conspiracy hoax. Speaking of, what a great day yesterday, right? So humiliating for Pencil Neck and the Resistance, right? That's a good band name. So you think the left is gone, but they're going to come back, and this is why Andrew believed in these next two lessons. The first one is he mastered the art of the double down. When the left comes at you, this is your moment to be the strongest. This is your moment to double down. Don't give an inch. Stand your ground. This is online and in real life. They don't want to listen to you. They don't want to be your friend. And they don't want to attack you. What they want to do is they want to attack you, and they want to see you lose. And so we need to embrace this. Andrew absorbed the hate, and he let it inspire him. And I wanted to let it motivate you to continue to fight. And to the leftists who think they're going to censor young conservative students without consequence, I say this: be careful what you wish for, because Breitbart will cover you. So the last lesson is that Andrew knew that sunlight was the best disinfectant. I think you guys understand what that means. The great conservative philosopher Edmund Burke famously said, "Evil prevails when good men do nothing." And we know that the leftist arguments can't withstand intellectual scrutiny, so we're going to expose them. We're going to hold them up to the light. We're going to amplify the squad, the AOCs, the Ilhan Omars of the world, so that people can see just how ridiculous their ideas are. And a quick aside, I have to note, the alternative to this speech I was thinking of doing is explaining the genius of Donald Trump and how he got the entirety of the left and the media to own the squad. Was that not incredible, what he did last week? How did he convince the entire establishment media and the Democratic Party to get defined by a bunch of anti-Semitic, America-hating socialists? Only Donald Trump could do that. Only Donald Trump. And did you guys see that today the New York Times published an opinion piece by Ilhan Omar? Will they stop publishing anti-Semitic stuff, please, New York Times, failing New York Times? So here we go. Let's recap. Well, this is just one simple act, one brave man screaming wildly into the night, facing down a horde of dirty, dirty fascists. There was a lot of strategy behind it, as you can see. Andrew knew he needed a cultural moment. He knew he needed to become the story in order to get that cultural moment. He knew he couldn't reason or convince the left. He knew he had to beat them. And he knew the media would lie about him once he tried. But he also knew that new media is king and that he would weaponize his social media. He'd weaponize his upstart website of blogs so that he could take control of the framing of the story himself. But he also knew this: the facts were on his side. He was righteous here. And he knew that sunlight or the truth about the left, it would expose them for the violent frauds that they are. He knew he had to be relentless. He had to be fearless. He had to be dogged in pursuit of one singular goal, and that's victory. And he knew this above else. He couldn't wait for anyone else to take responsibility for his life, for his values, or for his country. This is why the spirit of Andrew Breitbart, if you could sum it up in a phrase, is this: walk towards the fire. That's the challenge for you guys today. I leave you with that. When you're under attack on campus or online, walk towards the fire. When people are calling you names, walk towards the fire. When professors or administrators threaten you or your beliefs, and when you feel like you have to give up, you're going to give up, you're going to give in, this is where you walk towards the fire. You stand strong. You be bold. You summon up that courage, and you fight fearlessly. We have the best ideas, and we have numbers. Always, folks, walk towards the fire. Thank you. I'd love to take questions. How does this work here? Okay. I'd love to hear where you're all from. So if you give me your name and where you're from, that's very helpful.
I have my voice back to, no, don't. So I'm from Paradise, Texas, which is middle of nowhere. It's by Fort Worth. And I just want to say thank you for Breitbart News and like keeping it up, because it's always the first thing on my Instagram feed, and it's just awesome to look and see.
Thank you. We have number one political Instagram in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
And by the way, also, we've invested nothing into it. It's purely because people love the content. So thank you guys for sharing it.
So last week I was considering it, but this week I really want to make a podcast, like a channel and an Instagram. How do I gain publicity and like build that to where I can have an audience?
Yeah, this is good. So it's a great question, and it's a tough moment here because part of what we did at Breitbart, we were very provocative very early on. We embraced the troll, very necessary, as Andrew did here, to get attention. But you have to be careful because now we're in a different era. We're in an era of the corporate fascist. We're in an era where the tech elite are trying to get you censored, deplatformed. They're even doing debanking now, where you can't receive money if you've got the wrong politics. Frightening stuff. So you have to be a little more careful than probably we had to be at the very start. But what I would do is practice. There's the same way, if you want to get big muscles, like Graham Allen, who else is it? Tom Fitton. There's a lot of muscly guys. All right, the Turning Point family. You guys got to hit the gym. You guys got to hit the gym. So same thing with if you want to be a good podcaster or blogger or talk show host or activist, or even just if you want to be just someone who's good at convincing your friends at dinner, which is totally fine. Not all of you are going to go into the blogosphere and have 100,000 Twitter followers. You just want to be able to convince your friends and family from time to time. So, but you have to practice. You have to embrace the debate. When there's a good time to debate, Antifa's not interested in debating you, in case you didn't notice. They just want to yell at you. But if someone is, that's fine. But I mainly recommend practice and make friends. Make friends. Guys like Charlie are very helpful. Charlie elevates me. We elevate him. And that's a good model, is that you make friends and seek out mentorship, seek out internships, and start small. Take your time. I've been able to achieve a lot in my life, but it feels slow. The process felt like a lot of hours logged before I felt like people were paying attention to what I had to say. But it goes faster than you think. So just go for it. Put in that time, put in that reps, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, we don't have friends here. We're a big, giant family. Thank you guys so much for an awesome week.
Oh, we're going over here. Okay, great.
Hello, my name is Grant Freiling. I'm from Marshall, Virginia. All right. And I would like to ask you, what do you think Breitbart, it's obviously been 7 years since his death in 2012. Yes. What do you think Breitbart would think of the times that are going on now? Obviously, the political climate has changed, yes. Technology has changed since then. What do you think he would say right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and let me preface it by saying this. I really resent a lot of people who go out of their way to try to read Andrew Breitbart's mind. Part of what made him a genius is he was always ahead of the curve. And so many of his ideas, even the people who are his best friends, wouldn't necessarily see the strategy or the logic at first, and they would always come around to it in the end. That's part of what being a genius is. But I think he would love the new media era. I think he would love that citizen journalists are unquestionably more powerful than the establishment media. I think he would love that. I think he would love the proliferation of social media, but I think he would absolutely despise the corporate fascists in Silicon Valley shutting down decent people like you guys because they don't like what you have to say. And I think that would be a massive crusade. Andrew, he had many crusades, but I would say the two most important things that I thought of with him, Andrew was deeply anti-establishment. He started his websites in Los Angeles, not in the Beltway. He didn't want to be here. He wanted to be here sometimes, but he didn't really want to be. And he saw the bad guy was the media. And he understood the power and the evil that our establishment press has done for so long. And so I think he'd be pretty satisfied with what's happening now, but he would see a bunch of battles, as I noted in the speech. This is why he perfected the art of the double down and tried to vanquish the zombies, the zombie left. He knew they would never stop. And you're seeing it. They keep insisting that the president colluded with the Russian government to rig an election. We're 3 years into this humiliation. This is a conspiracy theory. This is a hoax. Rachel Maddow goes out there every night and she weaves this science fiction about how Trump was getting urinated on in Moscow and they rigged an election. What is God's name is going on here? It's absurd. And they keep going and going and going. They never stop. The left never stops. And so I think Andrew would have been prepared for war. I think he still would have been at war if he was here. Even though there's so much progress made, I think his war would have continued.
I'm Jared from Utah. Do you think there's any possibility that Andrew Breitbart might have been assassinated?
I don't. I'm just going to leave it there, but I don't. Let's go to the next question.
My name is Michael Emmerich from Austin, Texas, and I would just like to know, of all the Democratic candidates currently running against Donald Trump, who would you choose and why? Pardon my voice, it's not the best sounding.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's a great question. I'll tell you right now, here's what's interesting. The key moment of the debates, by far, was when they asked, do you want to fund the American people, to fund health care for illegal immigrants? So this is where people who invaded the country, foreigners who came in illegally, and do you believe that the United States taxpayers should pay for their health insurance? And every single person on the stage, was half the field, puts their hand up, including Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden, right then and there, if he had said, everyone stop it, this is a trap, put your hands down, we're not going to tax the American people to pay for the health care of foreigners, we're not going to do that. If they come in the country illegally, I think he would have sewn up the nomination right there. I think that would have been that, it would have been over. But he couldn't do it. Maybe he was spacing out. Do you think was he even paying attention? He's getting up there, man. He's very sleepy. He's very sleepy. Right. Yeah. He's gonna do push-up contest. All right. To me, it's kind of a dime's worth of difference. And this is one of the lessons of this, is that the left, they end up sort of regressing to the same value system. And even though there are slight differences with all the candidates, they're all going to govern roughly the same. So a lot of it is just what will be the key campaign tactic, what will be the focus during the campaign, and what people will hone in on. Like Joe Biden's got a lot of China ties, he's got a lot of corruption, he's got a lot of failed policies that he's flip-flopping now all of a sudden. And at, how old is he, 121 years old, now he's against the death penalty? It's like, well, what happened the first 120 years? You were for it, and then now he's not going to be able to keep up. The Pocahontas narrative, what we call Pocahontas, fake Pocahontas, is just so irresistible. It's hard not to root for Warren a little bit. And she's got a lot to square with, because she tries to portray herself as a populist, but she's a populist who's going to be soft on China and soft on Silicon Valley tech censorship and wants open borders. How could you be a populist who wants open borders? Who are the people who get penalized the most from open borders? It's the working class. They're the people who get competition flooding in for their jobs. How are you going to beat Donald Trump with that attitude? So, and they're all open borders. So, I don't. It's a great question. I don't really know. I guess Warren. I'll pick just to give you an answer. Let's continue.
Hello, my name is Jason Fiesel from Roundsburg, Ohio. It's a suburb east of Columbus, and I have been open with my political views since the 2016 election when I was in 7th grade, and I have faced relentless harassment at my school. It's only made me stronger. When you talk about walking into the fire, what's the best way to stay encouraged? Because when I hear that, I'm a pretty cynical person, so I'm like, yes, that sounds nice, but how do you stay encouraged?
Yeah, I think part of it, you find the strength in numbers. This is why these groups are so important. You can make friends here, online. There's lots of huge communities that are just, look, we're kicking the left's butt on social media. They built these formats. They built these companies, and our ideas are just much more popular than theirs, which is why they're trying to shut us down. Remember, they didn't start turning down the algorithm on Facebook. I know you guys aren't big Facebook people, I'm sure, but Facebook owns Instagram, so you guys are Instagram people. I know that. And they started turning down the reach when Harvard came out with a study saying Breitbart had just barely edged out New York Times to be the most influential of the 2016 election. That's sending a signal. Do you know where I read those data, that data about last night, about how Breitbart was number 2 and Trump was number 3 and Fox was number 1 on social? Washington Post. Why? They're sending a signal. You need to turn these guys down. So anyway, so the point is, that's why I know we've got the numbers. There are more of us than there are of them, because we think America's a great country, and we're not sitting around obsessed with crapping on the United States 24/7 like the Squad is. And it's a very easy message, and it's one that I think most people are with us. They just are shamed into silence, which is why hopefully you can look to people like Charlie and like me and like Turning Point and Breitbart and the president for encouragement, that if we stand up to them, if we fight back, that we're going to just attract more and more people to our side. And it is working. Trump wouldn't be president without guys like you. So stand in there, be respectful when you can, but just don't back down.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm from New York. So this year, I just entered high school. I started writing for my school newspaper. I'm the only person who's a conservative on the paper, and I had a few opinion pieces. I wrote an article about the new laws about abortion.
Yeah.
And I also had a few op-eds on a lot of the hot button issues, and all of them got shut down. And by the time I was able to get them approved, the school year was over.
Yeah.
So, and I don't expect this to stop. How do you suppose I fight back against this?
Yeah, it's tough to do on the campuses because they are sort of totalitarian. And this is a new battle for people like me, because I think the solutions on the college campuses are pretty clear. We need to, if you're not doing science, technology, math, if you don't need some sort of a higher degree for your desired career, you really shouldn't be pumping $50,000 a year into these liberal arts schools so that you can get a degree in women and gender studies from Wesleyan. It's just not worth it. And you guys really should not do that. And then there's resources online. PragerU comes to mind first, but there's many that are providing you the intellectual backbone in terms of political science, values, social science, that you can get. You don't really need to waste all the time. But ultimately, when it comes to the secondary schools, the public school system, K through 12, it's a very tough battle. And I do recommend that if you have an interest in being an educator, that you do that. People need you. Because we need to come up with alternatives. And in the meantime, we need to demand fairness from our individual schools. We need to be represented. Our viewpoints need to be represented in school publications and school faculty, et cetera. And this is a big deal. And this is a tough one because this is new, where the left is politicizing our children. I've got a 1-year-old I was in a bookstore in D.C. earlier this week, and I was reading children's books about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There was a Robert Mueller action figure for kids. That sleepy guy, that's a superhero to the left, and they can't let us even have a childhood anymore. The left must politicize everything, and it's a terrible thing to do. So what we got to do is we got to just encourage you guys just to stand up and just say, no, we're not going to politicize it. And this is inappropriate, and you're going to have to take these school boards head on. And if you do that, we will report on it at Breitbart News. I can guarantee you that. Send me an email. I'm looking at the clock. It sounds like I got time for one more, though I can hang on.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
My question is it right for the conservative movement to ostracize conservatives such as Milo Yiannopoulos when they make mistakes, considering he once had the support of Breitbart and was even formerly hosted by Turning Point USA? Or should we stick together and have each other's backs in the way that the left generally does?
Sure. Milo's a brilliant guy. I helped him out a lot, and I think that he'll come back in some capacity, but he made a lot of Nazi jokes, and that's a third rail that it's very hard to, it distracts from the message. He did a powerful message, but instead of focusing on the stuff that was resonating, he made too many Nazi jokes. It's just, I could expand on it, but I don't have an interest in trashing Milo. He's been through a lot, but I spent a lot of time trying to help him, and I think that I did help him a lot, and it's a shame what's happened, and he's going to have to reinvent himself. But it's tough to do because Nazis are not acceptable, and we can't have that flirtation on the right, or on the left for that matter. There's a lot more anti-Semitism coming from the left right now, and it's a big distraction. We got to get away from that. We got to get away from it from both sides. Okay, everyone, thank you.